Hola a todos y todas, mi nombre es Soledad Davis, coordino la plataforma educativa psicosemática en la que están ustedes participando y tengo el enorme placer de estar en este momento con Rupert Sheldrake, quien es biólogo, es autor, investigador y autor de muchísimos libros con temáticas sobre la mente extendida, nuevos paradigmas de la ciencia que cuestionan y van más allá del paradigma materialista mecanicista. Es mayormente conocido por su teoría de resonancia mórfica y los campos mórficos, y pionero en crear puentes entre ciencia y espiritualidad. Y estará dando unos seminarios para el público hispanohablante en psicosemática. Y bueno, Rupert, hello, thank you very much.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Rupert, it's a real honor to be able to have this conversation with you. Really, you know, I've been watching your videos and reading your books since I was a teenager, and so you are a great inspiration for me. I'm not a scientist, not in a scientific way, but for me it was a deep relief to listen to you as a scientist, saying things that I felt deep inside me as real, but the standard model of science says that they were not real. So I would like to emphasize that your work is not only important for the scientific community and other fields of studies, but also it's important for human soul and human mind. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I have many questions, but I'm gonna ask only a few to present your work and the topics that you will be presenting in this seminar at Psicosemática for a Spanish-speaking public. So let's begin. My first question is that in 1981, you have published the book A New Science of Life, the hypothesis of morphic resonance, in which you presented the idea of morphic fields and morphogenetic fields. How do you see or feel that this theory has evolved within you and within other fields of studies from then until the present day?
In the idea of morphic resonance, I'm suggesting there's a memory in nature that the so-called laws of nature are more like habits, that they evolve along with the universe rather than all being fixed at the moment of the Big Bang. I'm also suggesting that every species has a kind of collective memory, and that our own memories tap into a collective human memory, and also that our own personal memory comes from a resonance with ourselves in the past, that it's not stored inside our brain. Now, these ideas are obviously very controversial, and when my book first came out, some scientists loved it and were very supportive. Some hated it, and it was denounced as heretical. I was accused of scientific heresy. And ever since then, it's been extremely controversial. It's still a kind of taboo subject in most universities. It's still a kind of red flag taboo subject. Mention the word morphic resonance to academics in quite a number of universities, and they'll realize that this is forbidden territory. It's heresy. In private, things are completely different. There are many scientists and of course people outside science who are interested in these ideas. Many people in the medical world who are interested, but they don't like to say so in public because it's too controversial. And so I have secret meetings with eminent scientists and doctors who want to meet me, want to talk to me, want to discuss things, but they don't want people to know they're talking to me because I'm dangerous to know. So surprisingly, all those years ago, I mean, 1981, I mean, nearly 40 years ago, it's still very controversial and still treated as heresy by some people within science. It makes some people very angry, even just to say the words morphic resonance. On the other hand, there's been a great deal of interest in this from scientists, usually behind the scenes, not in There's been a steady stream of research on the subject, producing results which, on the whole, support the idea of morphic resonance. In the third edition of my book, A New Science of Life, which was published in England a few years ago, I summarized 25 years of research on this subject. So there's been considerable development. And what I was saying about the laws of nature being like habits is now being said by cosmologists. There's a famous cosmologist called Lee Smolin, for example, who wrote a book saying the laws of nature may be more like habits and the universe is evolving, so why shouldn't the laws also evolve, and saying they're habits. And he knows, I gave him a copy of my book 20 years ago. He knows all about my work, but he never mentions it because he thinks if he doesn't mention it, he'll be able to put this idea across with less controversy than if he does. Now, without mentioning the word morphic resonance, the idea of the laws of nature of habits is being discussed openly within cosmology. But they all know that it's related to morphic resonance. They can't say so because they might be accused of heresy. So it's a ridiculous situation. And when I gave a TED talk in 2013, talking about morphic resonance and other aspects of my ideas on science, then a number of these heretic hunters, the sort of modern Inquisition, managed to get my TED talk banned, which was a very foolish thing to do because, of course, it's all over the internet. You can't ban anything anymore. But so I have to say there are people who regard this as the worst heresy in science. There are a lot of people who think it's a very interesting idea and quite a lot who've been very supportive. But it's not taught in most universities or schools because it's heretical. So if you do a biology course or a chemistry course, it won't be mentioned, at least in public. In private, people may well be discussing it. So that's the situation. And I'm sorry to say that we still have this kind of taboo area surrounding morphic resonance.
Yeah, but there are other fields of the studies, like, well, I know psychology, for example, that they take your theories to...
Oh, yes. Oh, in alternative medicine, in Jungian psychology, in psychedelic research, in research on spiritual practices, and there's many areas where people are very interested in it. But in the hardcore kind of academic science world, it's very, very conservative and very dogmatic. And things are changing. The whole purpose of my recent book, The Science Delusion, called in America Science Set Free, is really to try and go beyond, in all of science, not just morphic resonance, this dogmatic materialism, to have a much more holistic kind of science. And I think everything is moving in that direction at the moment. So I think we're on the process of a major paradigm shift. It's just a question of how long it takes. I thought at first it would only take a few years, and I was wrong. It's taken at least 40.
You know that the name of the school that is hosting your seminar in Spanish and this interview is Psychosemática, that in English is the merge of psyche and cymatics. And I know that you have been researching on cymatics, and that there is a direct analogy between cymatics and morphic fields.
Yes.
Well, can you explain this a little bit?
Well, first of all, cymatics, for those who are not familiar with it, is about the patterns set up by vibrating fluids. And if you have a circular dish and you vibrate it up and down, standing waves appear on the surface of the fluid, which have patterns, radially symmetrical patterns, 4-fold or 6-fold or 8-fold or 10-fold. And I have a cymatic laboratory here in my home. And with my older son, Merlin, Dr. Merlin Sheldrake, we've been doing experiments together. And we've published a paper doing the basic science of cymatics, characterizing the various factors that affect these patterns, what the patterns are, classifying the patterns. It's like a foundational paper on the basic science of cymatics, which is on my website, sheldrake.org. Anyone can see the paper and these very beautiful patterns that appear. One reason I'm interested in it is because it's showing that through vibration you arrive at form, that form comes about through vibratory activities. And I started my career working on the development of plants, and my principal concern in biology is the development of form. How does a plant grow from a seed? How do all those structures, leaves and flowers and other structures, appear? Genes, of course, play a part. They enable the plant to make the right proteins. But the forms that appear, I think, depend ultimately on vibratory fields, morphogenetic fields, form-shaping fields. And that at the basis of all of nature is vibration. I mean, this is what modern science tells us. This isn't just some kind of esoteric, vague idea. This is standard quantum physics. An electron is a wave pattern. An atom is a wave pattern. A molecule has waves of activity. A crystal is made up of lattice vibrations. Everything's rhythmic and vibratory in nature. And the interface between vibrations and form is what we see so clearly in cymatics. And that's why I'm so interested in cymatics, because it's the easiest way to see this interface. You put in vibrations, you get out form. And I think that everything in our own bodies is vibratory. We already know, of course, that our heart's vibratory. We have electric vibrations in our brains, alpha rhythms and things. We're breathing is vibratory, and we have all sorts of cycles. We sleep and wake in 24-hour rhythms. We have fast vibratory rhythms in our cells and in our molecules, even faster ones. Everything about us is vibratory or rhythmic. And morphic resonance, the idea of memory and nature that I've been working on for all these years, is really about how there's a resonance between these patterns of vibration across space and time. And so resonance occurs between vibratory structures. That's why it's resonance.
So there is any connection with the idea of expanded mind that is the topic of your first seminar?
Well, yes, the idea of these fields of vibration, these fields of vibratory activity are what underlie the development of embryos, developments of plants, and also the activity of our minds. The interface between our minds and the brain are the electrical vibratory patterns that are happening in the brain. It's not just single nerve impulses. There are whole vibrations like theta waves and so on. You can measure them with electroencephalographs by electrodes on the skull. You can actually measure the changing electric field in the brain, and it's vibratory. And I think that the extended mind that I'm talking about in relation to perceptions, visual perceptions, is how our minds relate to the vibratory stimuli from our environment. The light that comes into our eyes is vibratory. That's what light is. Photons are vibratory structures. That light is vibration in the electromagnetic field. And it sets up wave patterns in our brains. All our senses create vibratory patterns inside our brain. The smell creates vibratory patterns in molecules in the nose, and that creates vibratory patterns in the whole nervous system, especially the olfactory part of the brain. So these fields that are associated with vibration of the brain and with light, in the case of vision, are extended beyond the brain. And what I'm suggesting is the fields of our minds are inside our heads, but extend far beyond them, just like the fields of a magnet. A magnetic field of a magnet is inside the magnet, the physical magnet. You can pick up the material magnet, and extends far beyond it. And that magnetic field originates from vibratory activities in iron atoms. Ultimately, it's the electrons whizzing around in the iron that the bar magnet is made of, that is the source of that field that stretches out beyond it. And so the vibrations and the patterns of activity in our brains are associated with extended fields that stretch out far beyond them. and also relate us to other people. In telepathy, which is one of the subjects I discuss in my seminar, there's a kind of vibration between people who are bonded or related through this field. They're connected through a social field. Members of social groups are bonded together through extended fields. And there's a kind of resonance between people that happens in telepathy, which enables people to pick up people's needs or thoughts or intentions, even from thousands of kilometers away. We've done experiments that I shall describe involving telephone telepathy between Australia and Britain, literally the other side of the world. And people can pick up these influences at a great distance. So, yes, my work on morphic resonance and morphic fields is related to the extended mind, because the extended mind is extended through fields which are within and beyond our brains.
Great, thank you. So in this same line of the extended mind, I saw other lectures in which you argue that the sun and the stars and planets are conscious and that has intelligence. Basically, you said that the whole universe is conscious and intelligent, and based on ideas like, I think, the extended mind, this holistic view of self-organizing system that we can see in cymatic experiments as well. And also there are other theories or that they call panpsychism, animism. And you know, Rupert, I am an astrologer. I don't want to push you to a more heretical place. But I'm a very passionate researcher on this psyche and cosmos relationship, and some of the underlying assumptions that support astrology is that of the anima mundi, the idea of a living universe, that the stars and the planets have intelligence. And of course, at the center of the study of astrology is time, and that time has quality. And that time is a kind of organizing principle, and there is this self-organizing principle also that we call cosmos. So it seems that some of your theories and ideas that you have been talking about could be very supportive of astrology. So I'm curious about what do you think about this psyche and cosmos relationship, and how is it possible that the movement of the stars can be related to human activity?
Well, in general, I think that we live in a living universe, you know, and there's within academic philosophy at the moment, there's a big rise of panpsychism, the idea of consciousness in nature, even in electrons and atoms. This 20 years ago would have been a very fringe view. It's now become increasingly mainstream within neuroscience and within philosophy of mind, at least in the English-speaking world. So there's now a serious debate about this, and it's partly because people are recognizing the limitations of dogmatic materialism. Dogmatic materialism says the mind's nothing but unconscious matter. So then how do you explain the fact we're conscious? So some materialist philosophers say, well, we're not conscious, it's an illusion, so there's nothing to explain. But that's pretty unconvincing. It causes the hard problem of consciousness, and that's why they're saying, well, maybe if everything's a bit conscious, atoms and electrons and cells, then our consciousness isn't such a hard problem after all. That's the reason for the rise of panpsychism. But if you think it through, then it suggests that not only self-organizing systems smaller than us, but self-organized systems larger than us are likely to be conscious as well, the whole Earth, Gaia, and the Sun. And I think that the Sun, the entire solar system, is like an organism. It's which has its own mind. And so this is simply a part of the holistic view of nature. And then the solar system is like a cell in the body of the galaxy. The galaxy is an even bigger organism in which stars and solar systems are like cells in the body of the galaxy. And then galaxies come in clusters of galaxies, which are like superorganisms. And then everything's ultimately within the whole cosmos, which is like the ultimate organism containing all other organisms. Now, this was, of course, a very common view in the ancient world. So, I mean, we find something like this in the Platonic and the Neoplatonic traditions. And we find similar things in other cultures. The idea we live in a living world made up of different levels of organization. I think this is the most correct and view of nature. It makes total sense. It's what we see. It's the way things are. They exist in these different levels of organization. And I think there's no reason to suppose that these levels of organization are not conscious. I mean, the whole universe may have a mind, the whole galaxy, a galactic mind, the solar system, a solar mind. And then the planets, Gaia is a living planet. And the Gaia hypothesis is even part of science now, to treat the Earth as a living organism. But also when we look at Jupiter and the dynamics of flow patterns in Jupiter and in Venus and so on, we can see the other planets have a different kind of life of their own. Now, what kind of consciousness they have, I just don't know. And I certainly agree with astrologers that the Earth is part of an organism. The whole solar system is an organism, and the way the planets move gives it different qualities of time. So does the solar cycle, the 11-year solar cycle, which gives these 11-year cycles of solar flares and sunspots. And then every 11 years, the magnetic polarity of the sun reverses. The North Pole becomes the South Pole. And then 11 years later, it changes back again. So the complete cycle is 22 years. And during that cycle, the sun's activity is changing considerably. I mean, it affects the weather on the Earth and many things on Earth. I mean, this is not a scientifically controversial theme. Everyone agrees that there's a great influence. That's why NASA, the Space Administration in the US, has a space weather forecast. It tells us what the solar wind and solar flares are going to be like. So I don't have any problem with the idea that our life on Earth is very much part of a larger organism, the solar system, influenced by the sun, and perhaps to varying degrees by the planets, which themselves influence the sun. They have a tidal effect on the sun and change the way the sun's being is, because they all have a gravitational pull on the sun itself. And because they're in different positions as they move around in their orbits, the quality of time is different, because the organism of the whole solar system is in different relative positions. So the physiology of the solar system is always changing, which changes the quality of time. That seems to me not only uncontroversial, but even obvious. That must be so. The bit where I have a bigger problem with astrology is when it comes to specific predictions or specific interpretations. You know, Mars has this influence if it's ascendant or descendant and stuff. It's partly that I don't know very much about it. I've never studied it. I've never felt particularly drawn to study it. My wife does and pays a great deal of attention to, you know, charts and things and times and so on. I suppose the problem I have with astrology as it's practiced at the moment is that it's not astronomical enough. Most astrologers do it from computer programs. It's too mechanistic for my taste. Although the philosophy is not mechanistic, the practice is. And in the ancient world, people thought that when there was a supernova in the sky, an exploding star, a sudden light in the sky, this was immensely important, an omen. You know, and I first became aware of this problem with astrology in 1987. Now, there was an enormous supernova in the southern sky. The scientific magazines and journals were full of stories of this incredible star. You could see it with the naked eye. It was, you know, enormous power coming out of this. Suddenly appears, lasts, you know, weeks. They're not there all the time. And in the ancient world, these sudden exploding stars were seen as omens of the most important kind. There was one around 1604, which Johannes Kepler took as an omen that he thought had an influence on the scientific revolution itself. So I asked my astrologer friends what they made of this great supernova in the southern sky. And they looked completely blank. It wasn't on their Mac program for doing natal charts. They just weren't interested. And not interested in going out at night and actually looking at the planets and the constellations. It's all done from a computer. Now, I'm sure there are some who do look, but most of the ones I've met are actually disconnected from the actual sky. And whereas the astronomers, amateur, real radio astronomers, academic astronomers don't look at the sky either. They look at computer outputs from radio telescopes. And I once said to an eminent British astronomer in Britain, a friend of mine, we were at night, there was a bright constellation. And I said, what's that constellation? He said, oh, don't ask me, I'm only a radio astronomer. He didn't know the main constellations in the sky, or at least to recognize them by sight. So what I think would be really healing, and what I'd look for and get really interested in, is if astrology and astronomy came together, and astrologers got really interested in looking at the sky, identifying the planets, for being able to point them out to people in the sky, not just on a Macintosh computer program or an app. And now, of course, there are apps where you can actually identify where planets and stars are, and that it's actually become much easier. So I look forward to an integration of astrology and astronomy, because at present the astronomers look at the facts and look at the sky, and the amateur astronomers look more than the professional ones, and the astrologers look at the meaning, but not at the actual physical facts. And so the astronomy has facts without meaning, and the astrology has meaning with some facts, but it could have many more facts if it became more observational. Yeah, so that's my view. I mean, it's perhaps disappointing view, but I do tend to, I look forward to this, something that hasn't happened yet, coming together. Or maybe it's already happening.
Yeah, they were together. The history of astrology and astronomy, they were together.
They were together. And the great, Kepler, who was one of the founders of modern astronomy, was an astrologer as well. Yeah. And, in England, when the Astronomer Royal, when they were setting up the Greenwich Meridian, the Royal Observatory, the whole of the Earth's meridian, the zero meridian, is at Greenwich, near London. And when they decided to set that up, he was an astronomer, but he was also an astrologer, and he had to find out the right time, elective astrology, to start the Greenwich Meridian and the Royal Observatory. They saw a connection then, which has now been lost. So, as you're right, they were together, and they could be together again.
I think that astrology looks the connection between the sky and Earth, and not only the measurement of the stars and planets, but also the correspondence between, to connect both. I think that I can talk with you about astrology a lot more, but it's not the purpose of this interview. We can do another one. This correspondence between, if there is any correspondence between morphic fields and astrology also. But I would like to continue with your seminars. I said that astrology was looking, the spiritual practice of astrology is to connect Earth, the celestial realm, and Earth in daily life. So in your latest work, you are presenting some bridges between scientific research and spiritual practice, and actually the Spanish version of your book have been published very recently by Editorial Kairos. Yes. Yes. And you are a pioneer on building bridges between science and spirituality. And I remember now those videos of you, David Bohm and Krishnamurti, for example, back to the 80s, I think. So,
yes.
Yeah. So it is clear that you have been doing this kind of dialogue your whole career. So what is new in this book?
What's new in this book is the fact that scientists for the last 10, 20, maybe 30 years in some cases have actually been studying spiritual practices. Before, there was a kind of separation between science and spirituality. Science was about facts and about nature, and many scientists, materialists especially, thought spirituality was just some kind of vague, subjective fantasy world that some people indulged in that was of no interest whatever scientifically. What's emerged through these scientific studies is that spiritual practices have measurable effects. If you meditate, there are measurable effects on the way your brain is acting, which parts of the brain are active. There's measurable effects on your blood pressure, your stress hormone levels. There are measurable effects on your sleeping better and on well-being. There are statistically measurable effects on the fact that people who meditate are less prone to depression and substance abuse than those who do. There are measurable effects on health and well-being of meditation and many other spiritual practices. So what's happening now is through a convergence of science and the study of spiritual practices, a scientific light is being shed on what's actually happening during these practices. For example, another one I discuss in my book, singing and chanting. When you're singing, there are physical resonances in the body which you can feel and measure. When you're singing with other people, you're resonating together. You're literally coming into harmony with each other. And you're in rhythm together because you're breathing at the same time. And the physiology becomes more synchronized. This creates a feeling of connection and group bonding, which has been used in all cultures, all traditions, and all religions throughout all human history. In fact, some people think that humans were singing before they were talking, that our ancestors sang first and talked later. And singing is a group activity and plays a major role as a spiritual practice. This has measurable effects that scientists can measure. It also has subjective effects that we can experience. And these are not separate realms anymore. These come together. The spiritual experience and the measurable effects are not in contradiction with each other. They're two ways of understanding and looking at the same thing. And I also show how connecting with nature as a spiritual practice happens for many people spontaneously, but it's also in Japan, it's called forest bathing. They've done a lot of studies there where people walking in the woods in a slow and meditative way have measurable effects, lowering stress levels, sleeping better, etc., compared with walking in city streets, for example. So there's now a lot of studies that show the scientific effects of spiritual practices. And this wasn't available before. And it's also the fact that taken together, all these studies show that people who have these practices are happier, healthier, and live longer than those that don't, means that this now is relevant to medicine and health. You know, if you're happier, healthier, and live longer and less prone to stress, heart attacks, high blood pressure, drug addiction, through doing spiritual practices, this is medically important. It's relevant to medical research. Medical research isn't just about giving people pills. It's about well-being, and spirituality is part of medicine as well. So this means that the old view that spirituality was just a fantasy, subjective fantasy of a few people who were too stupid or too ignorant to understand materialist science, left no place for that. That's given way to a much more interesting coming together of these different fields of study. And because it's now so clear that spiritual practices have benefit, even many prominent atheists and materialists, including Sam Harris, the American new atheist, have taken up meditation. Sam Harris is now giving online meditation courses. It's no longer one set of people rejecting all that and the other credulously accepting them. Instead, there's a very healthy coming together of scientific studies and practice in these spiritual practices, which are about experience. They're not about belief. You can have a religious belief and do these practices, but you can also do them without a religious overall framework. So it's not about signing up to a belief system. It's about something you actually do and things you actually experience. And those are measurable, and they come within the realm of science. That's why I think in my book, I'm showing how this convergence is happening. It's not just my own work. There are many people working in this area. But it's bringing things together in a new way. And I think it's putting us on the threshold of a new phase of spiritual evolution, because not only is the science coming together with the spiritual practices, but we now have access to spiritual practices from all the different world traditions, Hindu, Buddhist, shamanic. Before, our ancestors didn't know about any of these practices. I mean, none of them had heard of Tibetan dream yoga, for example, but now you can sign on and do a course on this in London or any other major city. So there's a greater openness, and with that scientific ingredient and many people getting interested in these practices, I think this is a particularly exciting time for spiritual evolution.
Yeah, one question that I think that is common when someone wants to put together science and spirituality is that they have two different epistemologies, that they cannot go together. So what do you think about this?
Well, you see, I think spirituality is about experience. Spiritual practices are about experience. You're in a beautiful place in the landscape. You have this incredible experience of connection with nature. That's an experience. You meditate, you find your thoughts finally drifting away, and you enter a state of deeper awareness, which may be joyful or give you a greater sense of connection. That's an experience. Spiritual practices are about experiences. Now, science is about experiences. I mean, science is based, it's empirical. The Greek word empirical means experience. And an experiment is an experience. In fact, in French, expérience means both experiment and experience. It's the same word. So science is based on theories, of course, but empirical science is based on testing the theories against experience. And if I'm a scientist and I say I've had this experience and this is what I'm reporting in my scientific paper, the old view was, well, the scientist has nothing to do with the experience, he's just reporting objective facts. But actually, the scientist has a lot to do with their the experiment. And it's recently turned out something called the reproducibility crisis in science. It turns out that most scientific papers can't be reproduced because the experience that one scientist has and reports in the paper is not an objective fact. It's his experience of doing this experiment. Someone else can do the same experiment and get a different result. This is a recent scandal in science. It's caused a huge crisis within science, the reproducibility crisis, because until about 5 years ago, most scientists pretended that science was uniquely objective. Every other human activity was contaminated with subjectivity and emotional desires and so on. But science alone was true, objective, and about totally objective, impersonal facts. It now turns out that's just not the case. Obviously, it's not the case because scientists are humans and have human motives and human desires. They want to get grants, they want to impress their peers, they want to get their papers approved by high prestige journals, they want to get promoted, etc. If possible, they want to win the Nobel Prize. These are all motives that have nothing to do with the actual facts of science. They're their personal motives. And it turns out that a great deal of science is non-reproducible. And of course we aim for reproducibility, well, scientists should try to minimize their subjective involvement. But the reason so much science is not reproducible is that what scientists do is publish only a small percentage, 5% or 10% of their results. And you present the results that look good, the ones that look best. You know, if you had 100 photographs and you had to submit one or two of your photographs for publicity purposes to publisher or to, you're going to select the best ones. You're not going to select ones at random or the worst ones. That's what scientists do. They publish their best results, which may not be the most reproducible ones. And that's led to the reproducibility crisis within science. So science, that reminds us that science is actually about experiences too. It's empirical, and so is spirituality. Now, there's a difference in that I can't directly share my own subjective experiences with you, but we know that intersubjectivity is real. We know that our experiences overlap to a large degree, otherwise human culture would not be possible. We wouldn't be able to share a language if we all meant different things by all these words. We may mean slightly different things. Colorblind people may see things slightly differently from people, or they do see them differently from people with normal color vision. There is a difference, but most of it is intersubjectively we agree about, even though I can't be inside your mind and you can't be inside mine. So intersubjectivity is how we deal with subjectivity. And actually, scientific consensus is really another form of intersubjectivity. I get this result in my experiment. You do a similar experiment. You may get the same result as me, and someone else may get the same result. Then we agree on our experience, and it becomes an accepted scientific fact. So actually, the idea of the epistemology is totally different, is that one's subjective and the other's objective, is really a false view of science, and it's one that scientists themselves have encouraged. And I don't know about Spanish, but in English, around the beginning of the 20th century, scientists adopted a really weird style of writing in scientific journals and papers. They used the passive voice. They said, a test tube was taken, it was carefully observed, as if there was no one actually taking the test tube or observing it, as if nature was unfolding automatically in the laboratory and the scientist was looking as if through a plate glass window at something happening, just objectively unfolding in front of them. Instead, of course, science is done by people. The kind of experiments we do affect the kind of answers we get. The questions we ask to shape the kind of answer we get. And in quantum theory in the 1920s, this was actually made explicit. The kind of experiment you do affects whether you see a wave or a particle. The quantum theory, it's a dialogue with nature. Experiments are a dialogue with nature. They're not just seeing what's objectively there. We interpret, we change things by interacting with them. And an experiment is it's like consulting an oracle, really. We're doing something and we're seeing what happens. So I think the idea that it's totally objective, which this absurd pretense that total objectivity with a passive voice in scientific papers, even in the conclusions, they'd say, instead of saying I think, they say it is considered that. As if something else is doing the thinking, you're just reporting some objective mind. Well, it's a ridiculous pretense. Luckily, people have given it up now, or at least they're giving it up. And they're saying, I did this and I did that. It's more true, or we did this, more truthful. Anyway, so I don't agree that the epistemology is totally different. There are some differences, but they're both empirical at root.
Yeah. So what, Rupert, you are going to give to seminar that for the Spanish-speaking public, one of the extended mind, and the other one is on this research on science and spirituality practice.
Yes.
And a third session that is live with you, so people around the world can meet Rupert Sheldrake and discuss and ask questions to him. So I think that is a great opportunity to meet him, especially for Spanish-speaking public. Anyone that speaks Spanish is welcome to this seminar of 3 classes. I don't know if you want to say something else, Rupert, or if not, we...
Well, no, just saying that I'm very pleased to be able to do this. This is a new experiment for me. I've not done this before anywhere. And so I'm very pleased to be doing this and sharing it with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Rupert, and see you then. See you soon.
See you soon.
So that's the interview, Rupert. Thank you.
Good.